You're very welcome to this week's Innovate Island event, and I will go back to Owen as quickly as I can just to get on with the day. We are, as I just mentioned, we're recording this, so keep that in mind with your questions, and keep in mind that it will be available through our portal in due course. So for the people that I haven't met before, my name's Charlie Tuxworth, and I'm one of the co-founders of Innovate Island, which came from conversations in coffee shops to quickly becoming a safe place to discuss, moan, share ideas, and pick up some information and inspiration around innovation, digital transformation, change, whatever you want to call it, however you want to tag it. So Innovate Island is largely industry-led. We've got very strong connections into policymakers across the island of Ireland, support agencies, education, academia as well. And we're representing the views of this kind of weird, half-developed industry stroke profession nationally and internationally as well. So if you haven't come in through this route, check out my.innovateisland.net to access some really good content, best practice, thought leadership, and a great place to ask those all-important, really stupid questions. We are non-commercial. The basis is non-commercial, but we know that conversations that are held in this environment on these sessions do actually lead to business. So we're not naive about it, but no direct selling is kind of our mantra, if you like. And while we're primarily focused on innovation on the island of Ireland, we're always very open to international visitors, international collaboration as well. So Johan, you're not Ireland-based. I think you're maybe the only one on the call at the moment who isn't, but you're very, very welcome. With that, Owen, I'll hand over to you to do a proper introduction.
Thanks very much. You build it up to a proper introduction, Johan. We don't do proper. We do informal and casual, and we keep it that way. It works for us, but if it doesn't meet your standards, tell us, and we'll try and up our game for next time. So thanks for opening the session, Charlie. Thanks for introducing this and us to those people who are newer faces, and it is really fantastic to see you here. Today, what we're looking at is a topic, but the person is the Swedish person. The person is the topic. Johan is the topic. What I did is I went to Johan and said, listen, we first met 5 years ago. I think your story would be really interesting for us because Johan is one of us. He's in our tribe, whether he realizes or not. Maybe not the Irish tribe, but the innovator tribe, the guy who's passionate about this stuff, the guy who's gone on a journey and ended up in this weird and wonderful halfway house that Charlie described. So we've asked Johan to lead the first 20 minutes or so to tell us his story, how it goes from being a physics student doing it. Was it an MBA in INSEAD, Johan? And to working on nanowires, nanotechnology. I think that's a fascinating part of Johan's story. On through Innovation 360, which is where he and I met. We're sort of fellow travelers on the systematic and strategic side of innovation. And on to talk about Rhubarbs and some of the insights he's had along the way. And I have a prediction. We may end up talking about this little weird thing called Wordly maps. Mr. Johan Persson, start the whirlwind.
All right. Well, I don't know if it's the whirlwind. There was a splash last time you told me, so I'll start the splash. And I'm a consultant, so I have this bad habit of needing slides to talk.
We can see it fine.
All right, great. For some reason, I can't see myself anymore. Let's see. Let's try that. There we go. So, as always, when someone asks you to talk about yourself, it gets a little bit awkward, at least when you're from the northern part of Sweden. That's not something we normally do, but I figured I'd give it a go. And I managed to make this picture about a Viking making a splash. So, and you can take from that I'm a bit of an enthusiast in the new AI generation world. You don't have to take it more. I know that the history between the Vikings and the people in Ireland may not be the best, so I hope my history with you guys will be a little bit better. So I'm just going to dive right into it and take you through my story and how I really ended up in the space of innovation management, and all the way from what I did to what I'm doing now. So the splash, as we called it, or my journey through innovation land, is really this one. And it's gone from being really an individual contributor, working in startups, first as an employee, and with these nanowires, as Owen called them, then to forming my own startup, being a startup founder for 6 years. Then I got lost in the woods, so we'll see what happened then. Then I worked for a very large company, and that was my first sort of official role that had innovation in it, so to speak. Then I went back and worked for a small company, trying to scale up innovation, before becoming a consultant at Innovation 360, where I met Owen. And I'll talk a little bit about what I've learned from that and what's happened during those 5 years as a consultant. And yeah, still being a consultant for Rhubarbs, just under a different flag than before. So what's happened in my life and what do I want to share with you guys? So the first thing is that in innovation, and especially radical innovation, or in entrepreneurship, I think there's an underestimated aspect of having really mentorship and being someone who is, it's a sort of a learn by watching someone else do it. So the story with me is that I was a lost and confused physics student. I really was thinking about doing something on my own, but it's difficult to have the idea. And then I got this opportunity to start working with this startup that was trying to develop a light emitting diode, so a light source, based on these nanowires in an exotic material called zinc oxide. And that place had a lot of problems. So one thing to take home from this is that if you're going to do something very difficult, you got to get the people question right. And it's not that the people have to be competent. What we had in this case is that we had a founding professor for this idea, and then we had a team of people from an entrepreneurship school that was driving the project. And then there were all these side people involved that had part ownership in the idea. And while that might seem like a good idea in the beginning, that you sort of share ownership and there's some sort of community around the idea, turns out once you start to have to make difficult decisions, that all falls apart. So this company completely disintegrated. Well, it didn't disintegrate, but ran into some massive problems. It said no to investments it should have said yes to, and so on and so forth. And it led me to the thinking, okay, if these guys can do this, so can I, which we'll see in the next period of my life there. But getting the people situation right and getting the right incentives in and not spreading decision-making thin, I think it's something you can take with you if you're working with innovation today. And there was someone working at an incubator clearing this up. If you have a team coming in with this massive spread of ownership, it's not a great start for a startup. I know from experience. All right, so I had to do something else. So I found this professor in Stockholm that was gonna come back from the US. He had been a researcher at Motorola, where he had worked with something called magnetic random access memories. Very advanced stuff. And he was gonna use the technology from there to commercialize new research that he was gonna do. So I started and I became a PhD student for his group. And we started this company, Nanos, in 2006. And we were going to do something extremely exotic. We're going to make something called a nano oscillator. So essentially you make a very, very small electronic component. Think about how you make microchips, that kind of thing. Very advanced, very difficult. And it turns out that idea didn't really work from a practical standpoint. So even though we made the effect work, it took us 3 years to make the first prototype of this thing. That's how difficult it was. Very, very, very difficult technically. But we managed to find a way to stay alive through participating in public different types of grants, getting a contract with the European Space Agency to sort of try this technology out, all kinds of sort of hustling ways. And by doing that, we lived for long enough for us to become better entrepreneurs and understanding how the commercial side of things work a little bit better. Because well, to say that we were naive is to be rude to naive people, essentially, trying to do this thing, because this is just, it was pure science when we started. But having that runway enabled us to try our idea for a very long time, and it allowed us to find something that actually could be commercialized. So what happened is that my co-founder, the professor I was mentioning before, came up with sort of a better mousetrap idea for a specific scientific instrument that we made and then started to sell. And the company is still selling that instrument today. And I quit the company in 2012, so it's a good 10 plus years ago. But we probably could not have found that thing and developed that thing and got it to market if we hadn't had that long period of survivability before. And again, this is a take home that if you're going to do radical innovation, it's likely that you're going to have to find a way to survive for a long time before you can start making work. And I think this is something that goes wrong when larger companies try to do radical innovation, because there's just no way something can survive on just someone's benevolence for 6 years, like in this case. All right, then having done that for 6 years, I was a little bit lost. I wanted to do something else. I was tired of being this ultra nerdy person. Unfortunately, that never went away, so I'm still that ultra nerdy person. But I want to do something else. So I went to business school, as Owen told us. And I went to INSEAD in France and Singapore and learned many things. And this is really where I started my kind of I got my first taste of innovation management in a more formal way. I got introduced sort of to the Horizon model and things like that. And after INSEAD, I still didn't know what I was doing or what I wanted to do. So I did all kinds of things. So I did a consulting project for an outdoor company in northern Italy. I did a corporate VC internship in Munich for 3M. So all kinds of things. And at the time, I felt very lost. But it turns out I have had a lot of those experiences have actually been very useful in the rest of my career. So for instance, being at 3M and understanding how a internal corporate venture capital arm works and having worked there has been extremely helpful for me in my current job as an innovation management consultant. So getting lost in the woods, it can feel bad at a time, but it ain't so bad when you look back at it. Well, at least it wasn't for me. So having been lost in the woods, it's kind of expensive because you don't get paid very well. So I had to get a job. And it turns out I could get a job at Constellium. And Constellium is a large manufacturer of aluminium or aluminum. I don't know exactly how you say it in Ireland. And I worked there with business development of new innovations. And when I got there, we had a portfolio of projects. And the way we approached them was very traditional R&D. And some of those projects were fine being run as R&D projects, but some of them really were not. And we had at Constellium this initiative having these corporate startups. And some of those corporate startups still existed. And talking to them, it was pretty clear that none of those startups really had a way to talk with customers, come back, make changes to what they were offering, and then go back to try and sort of find some form of product market fit. So I remember one example in particular, we were doing an aluminium foam, and we had customers that were interested, but some things had to be customized for these customers for it to work. But we couldn't make any changes. Any changes we made took half a year or even longer at times. So it was just completely hopeless to try and commercialize any of these things. And I see this again and again when I go to customers now that there's a complete lack of feedback loops. And I was in a conversation with a Swedish CEO just the other week, I think last week or week before, he's the CEO of a listed company in Sweden. And they've 5x'd their stock price in 5 years. They're doubled their revenue, doubled their profit, and so on and so forth. And for him, innovation was a big key. And I asked him, okay, what was the initiative that you did in order to improve innovation? Because innovation is the big lever for them. And this is what he was talking about. They were just talking about having these feedback loops. So the people developing things need to be connected to people that sell things, and the people that sell things have to be connected to the customers, and the customers have to be connected back, and so on and so forth. Getting that right, or emphasizing that, is really key for innovation. And in this case, we didn't have it. So that's a big learning point that anyone that works with innovation can take with them. Like, get the feedback right, and you'll have a much greater chance. Then from France, where Constellium was, back to Sweden, because I was kind of feeling homesick. And I worked with an old friend of mine trying to commercialize composite products for the construction industry in HWQ Group. And here we accomplished pretty great things. We've created a company that's still alive today. We sold a company to a collaborator. We sold a patent to a collaborator, so on and so forth. So quite successful. But we ran into some major hurdles, all due to the fact that our focus on the new made us take our eyes off the everyday work. So the cash flow from what needed to be there for these new sort of seeds that we were planting, that cash flow was drying up. So we ran into this major crisis. Fortunately, that crisis has been averted by the people that were leading the company, but it took them 5 years, and it took me leaving the company for that to work out. So having that focus is really important. And we were also trying to do way too many things at the same time. We probably would have had way better results if we were just focused. So that's a sort of obvious in hindsight kind of thing that I also think many people, when I come to clients, they almost always, I would say always, have way too many initiatives going on at the same time, and they don't prioritize, which we didn't either. So after that, given that crisis, I had to do something else. So I ended up in Innovation 360, and I had been in touch with Innovation 360 already in 2015 when it was founded, right when I left France. So I went, it just took me a while and I got there. And Innovation 360 has a few things they're doing. One of the things is they have this data-driven way of looking at your innovation capability. And I'm still in touch with them. I'm teaching their accreditation for their tools, etc., etc. But here starts my consulting career. And I've done, I don't even know how many consulting projects, but I think what I've found is, contrary to families, where families are uniquely happy, or which one is it? All the happy families are the same, but the unhappy ones are all unique. It's the other way around when it comes to innovation and success in innovation. I'd say most success is unique. The very successful companies have their own take, they have their own processes, they have their own, I don't know, spells that they are throwing. Whereas the companies that struggle all show sort of the same characteristics. And as a consultant, I always call it like being a consultant is like being a doctor. And when you go to the doctor because you're sick somehow. At least there's 1 part in a million of people that goes to the doctor so they can win the Olympics. But most people go to the doctor because their knees hurt or something. And I think it's the same with management consulting, that most companies go to management consultants because their knees hurt. And the struggle, you can boil it down to, okay, so people, if you have a company you want to innovate, first of all, is management and ownership really wanting to innovate? Are they supporting the efforts? If you're not innovating, the probability that someone is supporting the effort is pretty low. So support has to come first. And that's not always something that companies want to understand. They think innovation is going to happen without that support, and it will never do it. And then there's a general lack of prioritization, and there's no system to choose what you're supposed to be doing. And that's another general thing that I see all the time when companies are struggling. And they have this general belief that if they have one process for development or for R&D or whatever it is that kind of works, they think they can get all innovation or any type of innovation or any sort of phase of innovation into that same system. And it never works. So one size fits all approaches never works. So the struggle is all the same. If you solve those sort of basic questions that I just mentioned, you're probably on your way to becoming something better. After a few years at Innovation 360, I and a few colleagues of mine moved on and formed Rhubarbs, which we're doing kind of similar things. I'm still working with Innovation 360 using their models, but I'm also doing other things. And one of the things I've worked a lot with is Wardley maps. And my how did I find Wardley maps? It's because in Innovation 360 work and in general, we talked a lot about strategy and how strategy has to guide what innovation you're doing, and you have to have innovation strategy. And I was really struggling with that concept. And you might wonder what's so difficult about that. I didn't understand what is the distinction between a strategy and an innovation strategy. So what's that distinction? And maybe you here have a distinction. Great, I didn't. But so I had to felt like, okay, I have to read up what is strategy? What is strategy? And I'd gone to INSEAD, which is a relatively famous business school. I'd taken strategy courses, but I still felt like I didn't have a definition for myself, and I didn't really understand how you develop it effectively. So that led me to Wardley maps. And after finding Wardley maps, I really could make that distinction. And my distinction is that there is actually no difference between innovation strategy and strategy. And you just have to accept that. And having found Wardley maps and a few other things, as it turns out, once you have mental models that are appropriate for what you're doing, it makes you a much, much more effective decision maker. You can really recommend better and more effective ways of doing things. And other people will have the same benefit if they're willing to do the work and if they're willing to get behind these mental models that you found. So Wardley mapping is an example. But getting them to accept it and use it, there's a hurdle. And that's part of what the job is. So with that, that's where I am now. I'm using Wardley maps as a base to develop new offerings, to develop solutions to new problems for clients. And I hope to be doing that for some time going forward. So a short sort of summary of what I've learned in these phases. Hopefully it's a little bit more than this, but what I wanted to share with you is, all right, get the people right, get the incentives for people right, and don't clog it up with too many people. If you do that, that's the base for success. If you're trying to do something difficult, you need to make sure that you can live long enough for the difficult thing to succeed. If you do that, you have a great chance of success. And gaining experiences, positive, negative, you don't know if they're going to be useful, and you don't know which experience is going to be useful. So, go out and get them. If we're talking innovation, feedback loops, essential. If you don't have them, it's not going to work. There are some basic things that you need to have. You have to have a focus on the now and so on and so forth. It's quite simple to see in hindsight. You should prioritize, etc., but it's not always easy. And then with the right mental models, of course, you can avoid easy mistakes. You can make better decisions. And if you just can make people adopt these approaches. All right, that's it.
Johan, thanks so much.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks for sticking with it. Johan, thanks for being very disciplined and doing exactly 20 minutes, because 20 minutes is what you and I talked about. So physicist in action. We have lots of questions, and you notice that we've got a group of 14, 15 people here, so we are going to use the hands if that's okay with people. And on this occasion, Brian was first in, so we're going to give him first crack. Away you go, Brian.
Thanks, Owen. Johan, that was great. Really enjoyed that. Very informative. A great story. Thanks for sharing it with us. I just want to reference the piece you said, that probably one of the last points you said, where you said there is no difference between innovation and strategy. And, you know, I saw a few people nodding their heads, you know, innovation, strategy, our strategy. And I would strongly and really support that view. It's very difficult for people to understand that, but, you know, you're creating the future with innovation, which is what you're doing with strategy. And it's obviously about that strategy execution. But it is really, really difficult to take a plan and then look at it from an innovation perspective and how to do that. But really interesting. I really love that story, and thanks for sharing it. Brilliant. Thank you.
That's fantastic, Brian. Thanks for that. Mr. Tuxworth.
Yeah, I thank you, Johan. I've got a ton of questions which I won't get into straight away because I've got a more fundamental one. Wardley maps is something that was new to me when I saw the brief for this session, and I know there's been a couple of things posted around it, a couple of mentions. Could you elaborate on what a Wardley map actually is? You said that you use it, but can you elaborate a little bit for us?
Yeah, so a Wardley map is a tool developed by a man called Simon Wardley, who was a CEO of a company that was owned by Canon early 2000s. And he felt, yeah, there you go, Owen.
Big book, big.
He felt like an imposter when he was making strategies. And he got asked by people earlier in his career, is this a good strategy? Is it a bad strategy? And he said, yeah, sure, it's a great strategy. But felt like an imposter. So he felt like there has to be something else. There has to be something. So he developed Wardley maps. And Wardley maps is a framework based on visualization of strategy. So what you do is you make a map of a value chain where you start with the customer in mind. So a customer or a user has a need, and then you figure out, okay, how is that need going to be served? So that's sort of one axis of this map. And then the other axis of that map is trying to understand all these components that you have in the value chain. How mature are they? How much friction is there in the use of these components? And so on and so forth. And there's a whole, it becomes a little bit complicated, but that's the essence of it. And then you get a picture of what you're trying to do, how your customer is served, where there are things that are extremely well known and accepted, where there are things are very immature, and you get these patterns that you can investigate, you can challenge, you can use to create new strategies to win in the market, and so on and so forth. And the great thing is that since you have a visualization now of what your situation is, you get situational awareness, and you can learn from these patterns because you recognize the patterns over time. And you're starting to see patterns, and I find it, you might have noticed, I find that it's very easy to see the negative patterns, like the bad patterns. A bad pattern, for instance, is you're trying to build something to a mature customer need. You're trying to serve a relatively mature customer need. But then you build it on something that is immature. So some of you are CIOs or work in IT, is that you're trying to build this service, and then the data is all a jumbled mess. It happens all the time. So what Wardley mapping is allowing you to do is, okay, we have this jumbled mess down here. We have to avoid the jumbled mess if it's going to be successful. And then you have all these benefits that comes out from having these understandings. And I'm adopting it for innovation, but people use it for all kinds of things like purchasing or just project management and so on and so forth. So it's an extremely deep and wide subject
Okay,
that
thank you.
has a big following in the world right now.
Okay, thanks for that, because we sometimes fall into the trap on these calls of referring to tools and things and assume that everybody does know them, and I'm as guilty, probably more guilty than most, of doing that. So it's really good to come across something that I don't know, definitely don't know, and to get a clear kind of explanation of it. So thanks, Johan.
Yeah, and to get an introduction for it, because me talking about it, obviously, it's not a great introduction to understand anything. But there are videos on YouTube ranging from 5 minutes to 2 hours or whatever. Look at the 5-minute videos and you'll get a good introduction. And then Simon has lots of talks. And then once you're ready, you can search for my name and Warnly Maps, and you can see some of the talks I've given that are maybe more innovation management related.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that.
While you're doing that, Johan, I put up the post you did today about Sequoia. Martin has given us a reference from Medium from Simon himself. Thanks for that, Martin. And there's a couple of other comments from me, half serious, half silly, which is our want on a Friday afternoon. Where would you suggest people go first? If they're going to go somewhere first for Warnly Maps, what would that first reference be?
I think it depends on who you are as a person, right? So I found the book first, and reading the book for the first time when I had been on a quest, because I'd been on a quest. Yeah, that book. It's free available. It's available free on Medium. That book was a revelation to me. So reading that book was like the best, I don't know, 6 hours of that year, probably, at least professionally. But if you're not a book reader, I'd say find the short videos on YouTube. Simon does a great introduction to it. He has one that's called Crossing the River by Feeling the Stones. I think it's one of his most popular ones.
Yeah, that's good.
And so there. Okay. Sorry, that was my mother who is going to go pick up my children at kindergarten. She has requests that I put in, give her the code so she can get in. Sorry, where were I? Yeah, so videos. It's a good introduction. Crossing the River by Feeling the Stones.
Okay, lovely. Johan, I'm going to redirect completely, because you know I love Warnly Maps, and I was delighted that we were able to bring that up without burying people in it. That's for another day and another forum, really. But I love it, and I'm glad it was brought up today. And I saw even before we started today, Martin was starting to dig in. So you can see the kind of people it applies to, analysts and nerds. Martin, I didn't just call you a nerd. I didn't. But
I guess you just called me a nerd, right?
Yeah, I did, and me too. So apologies all round.
Hurts my heart.
Yeah. So my question to you is: early in the story, you talked about a mentor or mentors. I'd love to hear your thoughts on mentors, and you don't need to name them as such, but tell us about your mentors.
Yeah, and what I struggled to say there is because I forgot the English word for it, but apprenticeship. Apprenticeship is really underrated. So I have had, I don't know if mentors are the right word, but I've had a few people who has really affected my career in a positive way. And the first person is a guy I worked with at this first startup, the nanowire startup, who I'm still very good friends with today. And he's a Russian immigrant to Sweden. He came here when he was 12, and then I met him when he worked at this startup. And he really showed me what hard work and dedication really can do. Because if I'm completely honest, before meeting him, I was a bit of a slacker, and I still have some of that in my personality, but he burnt most of it out because we worked a hell of a lot in that startup. And was also rewarded with some success from working so hard. And his name is Viktor Kuzmin. He's actually a vice president at MasterCard today. He was the first guy, and he's my age. So not what you would normally consider a mentor, but he taught me a lot of things. Then the person that I worked with at HVQ is a friend of mine as well, who is really a strong entrepreneur, who sort of showed me a lot about how the real world works. So I learned a lot from him. You know, he's an entrepreneur through and through, and he showed me a lot about what that really is about. And in a way, I was an apprentice to him, and I feel like I'm a better professional because of that. And then I mean, there's countless in academia and so on and so forth, but I think those two are the main ones for me.
Okay, what I might suggest then is we'll go back to Charlie for a question, but what I'm going to do next is I'm going to just go around the screen and pick on people. So, you know, if you don't want to be picked on, do say so. Charlie, what do you think?
So you're immediately going to pick on me, so thanks for that. Yeah, actually quite keen to go back to the strategy versus innovation strategy discussion, and that point, and agree with Brian's point and your point that an innovation strategy is just a strategy. It's the same as any other, whether it's an HR strategy, an IT strategy, a strategy for transformation, whatever it is, it's the same thing. That's obvious in hindsight, like a lot of things that you talked about and you mentioned yourself. And once you know, it's really obvious that that's the case. But how many of the companies, or do many of the companies that you work with, see the need for an innovation strategy, or do they think if they put the word innovation into their business strategy, then that will probably do?
What do you think?
The latter.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm completely honest, most of my clients are small to medium-sized businesses. I sometimes do projects with larger companies, but they are usually not strategy projects. But I would argue that for them to have an innovation strategy, they would have to have a strategy in general. And what they pass off as strategy is usually not really something that's completely useful for innovation work. So there's a real need for for upskilling in strategy formulation, I would say, out there. And it's really it's not. There are a few like key aspects that people don't get, I find. And it's this, I think Roger Martin has a very good video on it, where a plan is not a strategy. I think that's the first thing you have to figure out, that a plan is not a strategy. And I think there's a lot of time wasted on creating these elaborate plans for no particular reason. And these plans are also very detrimental if you want to have innovation become a part of the way you go forward. So if you, instead of making it a plan, understand that a strategy is some sort of direction for how you're going to win. And then you have to explore that direction as you go along. If you can just sort of adopt the fact that a strategy is that, roughly. And that's how you formulate it, and that's how you make your people understand it. You're going to be in a much better position, both in terms of winning with your regular business, but also having innovation be a part of sort of the weapons you put into the market.
Okay, thank you.
Nicely answered, Johan. We'll have to write a book on that subject, but it'll be a short one, not like the Wordly Maps book. The Wordly Maps book, by the way, does have big words, big letters. It's easy to read, although it looks huge. Shirley, over to you.
Yeah, I have not studied Wordly Maps in depth, so thank you very much, Johan, for that.
Oh.
I'm having. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes,
yeah, it's just we're confused. There are two Shirleys, that's why.
Oh, okay. Go to the other. I was just curious. I probably shouldn't jump in. It's rude of me to jump in front of the other Shirley then. But I was curious how it fits with other tools like the ecosystem canvas, and how Wordly Maps work in highly volatile, uncertain, dynamic times. So I'm kind of looking at that between, does it fit? Is it somewhere between a journey map and an ecosystem canvas? So yeah, that we use a lot.
So I'm
sorry,
not
Shirley. Apologies.
Yeah.
It's okay.
I'm not an expert on ecosystem design, but I know the guys behind. Let me see here. He's an Italian guy.
Yeah, these guys here, the Rainforest book, the ecosystem canvas.
Yeah.
So
Okay. No,
it's a pretty good read,
yeah.
and
But I think Worldly Maps is you can use it anywhere really, whether it's VUCA or not, because it gives you a sort of guidance for where you have to focus and where you can let go. So it's complementary, and it's a tool as all tools, and it builds models, and as all models, some models are useful, some are not, but they're all making representations of reality that are not entirely correct, but you might be able to use them to make decisions. And I think that's true whether you're trying to use it in an ecosystem design aspect or if it's some other part of innovation.
Yeah, that's
I find it, well, I've found thus far, and I've been a serious Worldly mapper, let's say for 3 years, roughly, three and a half, that most of the time it gives me clarity, whether what we're doing is trying to investigate a completely new thing, or whether it's testing, a product with some simple, landing page or whatever. Having a map in the background can really guide you towards the decision you're making, and it makes you accept that, okay, you're in a VUCA world, but there are certain things you can predict what it is, certain things you can predict when it is, and so on and so forth. So the world is not as VUCA as you think.
Yeah, that's in there. It's really interesting. We're going to do more reading on that, and it's the whole idea of it's a tool for navigation, but when the map is changing, it's what other tools can we use and they interact with that. So there's a lot being written on it, and I need to do more reading. But thank you so much for opening this for the door of exploration for me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting parts is that we talk about things are changing, but in Worldly mapping there are specific patterns of how things are changing. Certain things always change the same way. All right, we had the other Shirley. So we'll let you in now.
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you very much. Hi, Shirley. Nice to see you here too. So I get the first one's a really simple question, and that is, why did you call the business Rhubarbs? I'm really curious because either you like rhubarb or you don't like rhubarb. So it's like almost like a Marmite in my world. So curious why you chose the name. It's the first one.
Okay, so why don't I answer that? So first of all, we had to come up with a name very quickly. For all kinds of reasons, and we made there were 4 of us trying to come up with a name, and we made this sort of Miro board where we just made up like 200 different names, and they were all kind of crap, to be honest. And at the time, we were in Estonia running a workshop, an innovation workshop there. And one of the companies in that workshop, they invited us to come and see their place. It was like a crypto startup or whatever. And then the 3 of us that were there, we got served a drink, an Estonian drink that was like a rhubarb lemonade. And one of us said, or I think it was me, I said, isn't rhubarb kind of an underrated plant? And I'm like, yeah, maybe it's an underrated name for a company. And then that's how Rhubarb came up, because we were under time pressure. We only came up with crap names, and then Rhubarb kind of made sense. But normally now I just say, Apple was taken, so now we're Rhubarbs. That's what I usually say.
Yeah, but it's fun, and it's good because you can tell a story with it. So my main question goes back to, you talked about the business when you were working with the professor and how you ended up going through, say, 6 years of working what you did. And then really what you guys did was an element of a pivot in finding another instrument that was needed and how that worked. In looking at Rhubarbs right now, and for other fellow entrepreneurs that are maybe listening and thinking a little bit more, how has your business model evolved from the concept that you started with to what it is today? And was there any significant pivots or adjustments that you felt that you and the team needed to do?
In the rhubarb sense, no. I think rhubarb in the beginning, it was sort of let's just see what happens, and we'll just continue doing what we have been doing. And in a way, we have been continuing to do what we have been doing. For me, I think the great thing about Rhubarbs has been intellectual freedom. So I've been able to develop these things that I want to develop without asking anyone for permission. And I think in terms of a business, Rhubarb still have ways to go, and trying to find a bit more some more focus in exactly what we are offering and the exact problems that we're solving, and finding channels to reach the people with those problems and so on and so forth. But so I would say in general, we haven't really pivoted.
Okay. Thank you.
In that sense, we've been searching and we have not been pivoting.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Shirley. Good question. Sorry you had to wait for so long. I did not realize that both Shirleys were on the call. That was my fault, not the other Shirley's fault. I have loads of questions, and we've only got, well, not even 10 minutes left. I'm going to dive in. If you go back to a comment you made about the radical stuff, and you need cover, and it's really hard for radical stuff to survive. Radical isn't most of what most people do at all. It's the stuff that I find fun. So this is a little bit back to theory. When you talk about Clayton Christensen, he thought, forget it, you just can't do it in a mature organization. When you go look at Tushman Riley and other people, they say, oh, of course you can. You just need this idea of ambidextrous organization. So that brings in a couple of theorists, and not to get too highfalutin about it, but where do you sit? What do you do with radical innovation in an organization? Do you broadly say that's not for us, or do you broadly say, yeah, we can do this?
Well, I think radical innovation is not a useful concept. I think you have to be extremely specific what you mean in whether a company can carry it out or not. So saying that someone can't be radical or can be radical just because they're a large organization is more or less completely meaningless. And I think it's entirely possible to organize in the way you're organized now. You can make it happen, or you can organize yourself and you have special teams that does it. That's also possible. You can make that happen, and so on and so forth. But what is absolutely clear is that you have to have someone that wants to do it and has the power to make it happen for it to happen. To have some enthusiast further downstream in the company wanting to do it and then finagling a way to do it for a little while, that's going to make it fail for sure. That's my take on radical innovation. And it's not very intellectual. I think if there's someone with enough power that wants to do it, you for sure can do it, at least for as long as that person is in the company.
A really good answer. I hear sort of false dichotomy, and just find out what's possible with the people you have in front of you, the desire.
Yeah, but I think it's not I don't think it's a false dichotomy. But radical is it's a description. It's not a prescription.
Absolutely. I think we'll run with that. I consider myself well answered. Thanks very much, Johan. Charlie.
Yeah, just to continue that bit of the conversation, I think this is the biggest challenge that we've got as Innovate Ireland, representing people who innovate within established businesses or established organizations, because when you talk to a lot of people about innovation, they think it's world first, they think it's invention, they think it's new products and new if you use the idea quadrants, it's new products and new markets. And I talk to a lot of companies where they say, well, what level of innovation do you want? And they go, we want to be radical. And as a stupid example, I say, well, you work in the software business, in business to business software. So are you now going to start selling bread to supermarkets? And they go, well, no, of course not. well, it's a new product. Okay, it's not a world first, but it's a new product to a new market. So what's the difference between that and spending time coming up with a world first for somewhere where you're not quite sure where it fits yet? So
Yeah.
and the balance is getting people to understand innovation is more than that radical stuff, in order to be able to have the conversation about, well, actually, all of the things we're talking about, all the things you've said, are relevant to an existing organization.
Yeah. And honestly, my views on this has been extremely shaped by worldly mapping. And I'm sorry we come back to that, but from a theoretical sense, worldly mapping reduces innovation to something very understandable. And I think worldly mapping also teaches you that having something, this general idea of radical innovation is not helpful, because there are certain things your organization can execute fairly easy, most likely, that are going to be extremely radical. And there are certain things that would be considered incremental that your organization can never do. It's situationally dependent. So depending on the situation, with who you are, what your capabilities are, what your value chains look like, what choices you made in the past will really determine what you can do.
If I can come back on that, then I do find radical useful, but I don't find anything specifically useful inside the word radical. I find it really useful to talk to people who don't seem to have ambition, or do have ambition and they haven't shaped it. And just to make the distinction between things that really aren't very ambitious at all, and what does a little bit more ambitious look like, and how about a bit more ambitious than that? Where can you go? It's the nudge, it's the poke, it's the prod, it's the conversation and looking at the whites of the eyes. So that I find useful. I do find the discussion as to whether you say breakthrough or radical or disruptive or whatever else you're having for breakfast, I find that a little bit distracting. But we don't control language. We use it as best we can. So I find that conversation fascinating. I love your perspective on that, Johan. I think, ladies and gentlemen, we're at the end of our lunch hour. It's time to give you back your day. You're very good for sticking with us, Johan. We really, really appreciate you joining us. Thanks for the insight. Thanks for the story. And thanks for your humility. Well done, everybody. Next week, Charlie, what are we doing?
I think we're coffee stop next week, and potentially the week after. We are looking at, we're talking about doing an event, I think, before the summer break. Details are a little bit sketchy just now, but we are planning to do something before we kind of break for the summer, because we would like to get together and continue the conversation and progress the conversation about where Innovate Island could go and should go as well. So yeah, that's the next few weeks. Johan, again, just to echo Owen's words, thank you so much for your time today. It was really interesting.
Well done, Johan. Well done, everybody else. Enjoy your weekend, folks. See you soon.
All right, cheers. Thanks. Bye-bye.